Up next, we have Hacking Cars and Crops on a Budget with Griffin Payne.
So thanks everybody for taking your time out of a Sunday afternoon to join us. And thank you to the PancakesCon organizers and volunteers for putting this all together. It's good fun. So today we're going to be talking about hacking cars and crops on a budget. So let's begin. There you go. So who am I? I'm Griffin Payne. And in my professional life, I'm an associate director on Protiviti's attack and penetration testing team. And what that means is I spend a lot of my time on the phone and doing PowerPoint presentations and not so much hands-on hacking these days. But in a former life, I was a pen tester. And previous to that, I've done IR, blue team, compliance, and everything in between. Oddly enough, I never wanted or intended to be in security or IT. I wanted to be a video editor when I was in school. But trying to get a job doing that in Cleveland was a bit hard, so I got a job doing help desk and kind of progressed through the years into security, and here we are. In my personal life, I'm a husband and father of 2 young boys, so I don't have much free time at all anymore. I like to collect art and scotch, so I'm pretty excited about Nick Britton's rare collectibles talk here in a little bit. I like growing plants, which you will see here in a moment. I'm an outdoor lover. I'm living in Denver now, so lots to do out here. Big fan of animals. I have some dogs and cats, and I'm not a very serious person at all, as you can tell from this picture of me in a hot dog suit at DEF CON China a few years ago. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So before we start, I'd like to throw out a disclaimer. So what is presented in this content, what I'm going to be talking about, could be used for nefarious purposes. And you are solely responsible for what you choose to do with this information. And it's all made for educational purposes. There's plenty of research online that you can go find that will help enable you to build these things, but it's entirely up to you what you do with it. So with that, a lot of the techniques and tactics I'm going to talk about on the automotive side are dated. So there's nothing groundbreaking or zero day coming out here. It's all things that have been out in the wild for a long time. But the intent of this talk is to show you what you can do with a very small budget and a little perseverance and dedication and willingness to learn. So a lot of these techniques still work on older models, but some of the newer models have mitigated a lot of the things that we're going to talk about or just scrap the technology altogether. Now, with that being said, so when I used to present to automotive companies, OEMs, as they're called, original equipment manufacturers, to talk about testing and why testing is important to them, this was the pitch I would use to start. So here we go. Imagine you're driving down the street, nice summer day, you got the windows down, you're just listening to some music, and all of a sudden, the music cuts off. And you get this weird error message on your infotainment screen. And you're like, what is that? You start tapping on it, boom, ransomware. In my car? How is that possible? And when we used to say this to the automotive companies, they're like, yeah, right, ransomware in car. But then it started happening to refrigerators and thermostats and things like that. And they're like, okay, maybe this does apply to us. Maybe we should listen. Now, to give a little backstory about when I first got into automotive testing, I honestly didn't think I would ever be able to do it. Like, I never thought I was a good tester. I'm still not a good tester. There's plenty of people that are way better than me. And then coming from traditional IT systems into the automotive world, knowing how much time and money is spent producing these vehicles and airplanes and things in the transportation industry, I assumed it would just be like top of the line technology and state of the art tools and software. And in reality, that's not the case. So when there's a software vulnerability, people like Microsoft or Cisco will push out a security patch in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever. And it fixes the vulnerability. In automotive or transportation or gaming with slot machines and things like that, anything that's built on hardware with software overlaid isn't as easy to fix. So when a vulnerability is found in a piece of hardware, you can't just push out a software patch and fix it in a lot of cases. And once it's discovered, it's out there. Recalls are really expensive. The production life cycle on vehicles and planes and trains and things like that is really long. It could be anywhere from 1 to 15 years from product inception to design, requirements, definitions, prototyping, test, prototyping again, and then production. So when a vulnerability is found, it's a long time coming before you can push out a fix for it. And then when you're building these things, you don't anticipate what the attack surface or the techniques are going to look like in 10, 15 years. So when I began testing automotives, I didn't think I'd be able to do it. But then you jump in and you see things like Telnet and clear text protocols and Linux operating system with SE Linux features turned off because it makes the infotainment unit slower to boot. And it's a lot easier to test than you might think. So get the preconception out of your head that you won't be able to do it, because anybody can do it. And we all start somewhere. If you want to get more into automotive testing, I highly recommend popping into the automotive village, the car hacking village. Those guys are way smarter than me. They virtualized a lot of things so you can get in there and play with stuff. And it's really good learning experience. You're not going to break anything. You're not going to hurt anybody. So absolutely talk to those guys, pop in there and ask questions. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get into it. So the point of this talk is to show what you could do on a very limited budget on both growing crops and hacking cars. So our first example is going to be a homemade passive keyless entry start amplifier / relay. Now, if you're not familiar with a passive keyless entry start, I'm sure most of you are. It's when you walk up to a vehicle and the keys are in your hand or your pocket, and you touch the handle of the car and it unlocks, and you didn't do anything with the keys. Or you get in the car and you don't put the keys in the ignition, you just push the start button. Now, the way this works is the car emits a high frequency signal when you're in close proximity, and the keys respond with a low frequency signal and say, yeah, we're right here, open up. Now, when this technique was first hitting the scene, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, police were dumbfounded when they saw the home security footage of these criminals going to houses and holding something up to the side of the house. Another guy would open the car, start it, and drive off in less than 2 minutes. So when they found one of these devices, they figured out that's what was happening. And then we were talking to OEMs about this, and everybody always downplayed it. They're like, oh, it's not going to happen to us. It takes very sophisticated equipment, or it's really expensive, whatever the case. We're like, well, hold my beer, watch. So we built this using really cheap components. So what you see here is a spool of copper wire, a breadboard holding all these components together, a microcontroller with about 30 lines of C code, and a battery. And it's all stuffed into a defibrillator case because that's what we had laying around. So all of this is done for less than $20 and less than a day. And this is what it can do. So in this video here, the keys are inside the house. This green thing in my right hand acts as a receiver. So it takes the signal from the vehicle and amplifies it through the box to the keys in the house, which then respond with the low frequency signal, which travels further. And let me show you how this works.
Good.
And that was all done in what, less than 30 seconds. So this is, a serious problem for car thieves, and newer cars have mitigated this in the new key fobs, but this is still a very prevalent attack. My wife's friend out here in Denver actually had her car stolen a few weeks ago, and this was the suspected technique because no signs of forced entry. It was in and out in less than 2 minutes. Still a very real attack. Another point to mention there, if you heard the 2 beeps in the car, I'm not sure if you did, it's the car alerting me that the keys aren't in it. As a thief, I don't care. I'm driving this to a shipping container, dropping it off, getting paid. I don't need the keys. But it's an audible alert because you can't disable the vehicle while it's in motion because it's a safety hazard. So this isn't going to stop anybody from stealing your car if you're so inclined. Now, the next technique we're going to talk about is using software-defined radios. Now, this will be the most expensive tool in the bag. They range anywhere from $30 to $350. The Hack RF1's probably my favorite and one I see most often in the field because it operates at a really nice wide operating frequency from 1 megahertz to 6 gigahertz. The price differences you'll see in these basically gives you more operating frequency. Now, with that, you get to communicate with more things on those channels. Some of the cheaper ones, the $20, $25, they'll operate at a very specific frequency. So if there's not something talking in that range, you won't be able to communicate it with it. But the Hack RF1, for example, has a really wide range, so you can talk to garage door openers, cars, whatever. In this example, we are targeting a tire pressure monitoring sensor. And that is the little sensor that's in your wheel that will detect if it's beyond the recommended tire pressure sense. So if it's higher or lower, you get the little alert on your dashboard. Now, I was doing some research on this particular product or whatever for a vehicle before this talk, and I hadn't seen anything new, so I think they scrapped it all together. But at the point in time when we were testing this, it was a self-inflating tire system. The way it worked was there was 4 sensors in the tires, a central control unit that received the messages from the tires that then talked to a pneumatic control unit who would inflate or deflate the tire based on need. Now, this picture is just an example. It's not what we were actually testing, but the applications for this were military, commercial, and heavy machinery. So imagine you're in a battlefield situation. You don't want to get out of the car and pump a tire or change a tire if you have a flat or if it's overinflated. So they had this, the system that would inflate or deflate based on need. So we're testing it with a software-defined radio, and we were able to, capture the communications from the tire pressure sensors that were going to the central control unit. We were able to spoof those and trick the tire pressure control unit into thinking the tires were underinflated or overinflated. So think about the implications for that in a battlefield or in some heavy machinery. So we trick the tire into thinking it's underinflated. It just keeps getting pumped up until it explodes. So if you're in a battlefield, it's the last thing you want, which is why they probably scrapped this technology. At least I hope they did, or figured out a better way to protect it. And all that was done with a software-defined radio and a computer. So not a lot of specialized equipment. Next, we're going to talk about the CAN bus. Can't talk about cars without talking about the CAN bus. So in a traditional IT network, you're thinking, cat wiring and things like that. In a vehicle, everything is, a CAN bus. The ECUs, which are the electronic control units, are basically little computers that control various functions of the vehicle. There's various networks in a vehicle. There's, besides the CAN, there's LIN, FlexRay, most. The easiest to interface with, at least in my opinion, is the CAN bus because you could talk to it through the onboard diagnostics port, which I'll show you that in a moment. But this is one of those things I thought was just going to be super expensive. I'd never be able to do it because when you take your car for an emissions check or for maintenance, they plug it into this super huge machine that's got to cost thousands of dollars. When I first got into this, I didn't think it would be a realistic thing to do at my own time. And then I found things like the CanTech for $75. I personally use the Canalize for $60. There's the Cannibal here, that's $80. And what this does is connects into the ODB port in your car, which can be found above the footrest. And it's always accessible because it's used for diagnostics. So it's not going to be any screws or anything holding it in place. It may not be as easy to see as this picture here, but it is always going to be on the driver's side somewhere on the dash. And this device will plug into that, and then it has a USB adapter that plugs into a computer. Now, things like Wireshark have native CAN support. There's other tools like CAN Utils that have CAN dump and CAN send, so you could send packets and capture packets. If you want to play with this more, again, pop into the Auto Village. Those guys have various components in there right now that will let you play with CAN messages. You can replay them, spoof them, and try to figure them out. Now, with CAN messages, they're not straightforward. There's not a standard used across all the OEMs, so they're not going to be able to find a cheat sheet to see what things mean. And when you first plug into it and start capturing the data, it looks crazy. It comes in super fast. Nothing's very clear. Like the IDs are all over the place. You don't really know what the messages are saying. But if you want to play with it, you could do it in your own car, plug in, and then do things like turn on the windshield wipers, or do your turn signal, or put the car, push the brake or push the accelerator, and just keep doing that over and over, and you'll start to see the same frames over and over again. So then you capture those, you can replay them, you can put them into a loop and just blast them in there, and then it'll start to do things to your car, and you can identify which message is doing what. Now, through the CAN bus and the ODB port specifically, you can do a lot of things. You can unlock and change features. So like in my car, for example, I could change, what the key press does on the keys. In the picture before was from an Audi forum where a guy was flashing an ECU to do a turbo boost unlock. You can do actions such as triggering the airbags, the brakes, or the acceleration. And when we were doing automotive pen tests, that's the type of stuff we were looking for. Could you communicate with something through the CAN bus to trigger the airbags to pop, because ultimately safety is the most important thing in a vehicle. And if you could impact safety through something is like the CAN bus, then it's a major problem. So one of the other disclaimers I'll throw out here is playing with your vehicle and the ECUs could lead to potential damage long term. I've never done it personally. I've never broken anything in my car playing around, but I have seen horror stories where people have bricked ECUs and they've had to like tow their car to a dealership to get it flashed, and it's cost money. So, proceed with caution. There is a lot of techniques now and tools where you could virtualize these. You could buy ECUs off of eBay for $40, $50. There's a resource I reference at the end of this talk that shows you how to set that up, throw some 12-volt power on it so you can have it on your test bench and not actually playing with the car. And then there's other great places, again, like the Auto Hacking Village and, forums and groups like that where you can play online and not actually do any damage. Next is the infotainment system. So when, I guess the last few vehicles I had didn't have an infotainment system. And when I finally got one, I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, how do I interface with this thing? It's seamlessly integrated into the dashboard. There's got no ports on it. Like, what am I supposed to do? To play with this, you don't really need anything besides a computer. And if you want to figure out how to get it apart, look up a YouTube video or Google, how do I replace my infotainment unit? And you'll see things like step-by-step guides. So in this particular vehicle we were testing, it just showed these two little yellow clips that held this piece of plastic in place. So you just put a little force and pull it off and it came right off. Nothing broke. And now we have the infotainment unit exposed to us, and it was held in by these two screws on each side. So what do you do when you have this device? Well, you pull it out. And it's basically just like a little computer. It's in a chassis. It's got screws and everything else. And what do you do with the computer when you want to play with it? You take it apart. So pro tip, keep a jar or a little magnetized pad there so you don't lose the screws. Every time I take something apart, there's always extra screws when I put it back together. Don't know where those come from. But, once you take it apart, you'll start to see things on there that you might be familiar with, such as an SD card reader. And once we found that, we popped the SD card out, put it into a laptop, and what did we find is a Linux file system that was readable and writable. So once we mounted it and started playing around, we found all these binaries that had vulnerabilities, or we could decompile the code on and play with them. Once we did that, we just put it back in the file system, put it back in here, put this together, dropped it back into the vehicle. Boom, we owned all the applications on this thing. We had root access. We could bypass paywalls that the automotive manufacturer had through the store. So we could abuse features, do some monetary impact. We weren't able to communicate on the CAN bus because of whatever limitations we ran into through the test. But you can do a lot without any specialized tools when it comes to the infotainment system. So next, we'll look at wireless. So anybody who's done a wireless test in the past will be familiar with these devices. Alpha is probably one of the most prevalent. There's also the TP-Link there, which is only $15. Anything that does packet injection, you can do a wireless test with. So in this particular example, we were testing a handful of vehicles. So there was simultaneous tests going on. There was destructive testing of a team tearing down an infotainment unit. We were doing wireless assessments. People were just looking over the whole vehicle. While we were testing, we observed that the infotainment unit was beaconing for this access point. It wasn't ours, so we used the wireless USB dongle, used host APD to use that access point name, and as soon as we set it up, the vehicle connected, no username or password. Once that happened, we did a port scan. We observed port 22 was there. We tried things like root admin, eventually guessed it on like the 5th or 6th try, and we had root access to this device. So while we're doing that, the team doing the destructive testing was checking out the data sheets, realized the chip used in the infotainment unit, IVI's in-vehicle infotainment, allowed for ad hoc mode, and that was disabled via software. So we got to thinking, let's enable that, and we did. Use the same access point name that the car initially connected to, and then the car was acting as an access point. Now all the other vehicles that we were testing connected to it. With that idea, we decided to push some malware to the vehicle. So we did, and then it propagated to the other vehicles. So we actually created this wormable exploit that connected to all the vehicles. And if you think about it, again, this goes back to thinking that you're not going to be smart enough or have enough skill to test a vehicle. All of these are basic security best practices. Wipe the infotainment unit before it leaves the factory. Use a strong root password. All of this could have been prevented, but it wasn't. And it's just basic security missteps that allowed us to take over this fleet of vehicles. So to summarize, none of that was very expensive, was it? I think the most expensive thing is the Hack RF1, and it's $320. Everything else can be had for less than $100, and you can do whatever you want with it. So again, pop into the auto hacking village, play around. Don't ever feel like you're not smart enough or you don't know enough to do it. We all start somewhere. I still don't think I know anything about this stuff, but you just jump in and start poking around. That's how you learn. You try new things. So let's switch gears. My other passion of mine, growing plants. I love plants. When the pandemic hit, we would go to the store to buy food. Nothing was available. So I was like, okay, we're really going to have to kick this into gear. We're going to need to learn how to make bread, everything in between. So this picture here, you'll see a banana tree and an orange tree, which aren't native to Cleveland. So I do enjoy growing plants, but it was really tricky in Cleveland. I don't know if you've ever been there or you're from there, but the weather's really unpredictable. You could have 3 months of no sunshine. It could be freezing in the middle of summer. Growing outdoors wasn't really tenable. So I moved it all indoors. As you can see in this picture, these are a bunch of tomato plants and a banana tree in my closet. And they don't look like they're doing very well, do they? The tomato plants got really tall and fell over. I was like, there's got to be something easier than this. There is. Enter aeroponics. So aeroponics is a version of hydroponics in which there's a container that holds plants in these pots that allow the roots to be exposed to a constantly spraying mist. And in aeroponics, there's two types. There's low pressure and high pressure. And what we're going to be talking about is low pressure, where it's a 24-hour spray of mist for these roots. Now, once I found out about this, I was like, I got to get one of these things. Let's go buy one. But for $940, like, that's crazy. Look at this thing. Like, it can't possibly cost that much, right? Right. So let's show you how I put one of these together for pretty cheap. So first, you're going to need some PVC pipes and connectors. You can go to any home improvement store, your Lowe's, Home Depots, Menards, whatever you have available. 10 feet of 1/2-inch diameter pipe is $2.40. I use less than 20 feet, plus the elbows, the T connectors, and the ends. It all came to about less than $10. Next, you're going to need the sprayer nozzles. Like I mentioned with aeroponics, you want to create this fine mist. So these nozzles go into the PVC pipe and the water pressure goes through and it's forced through these nozzles and creates this fine mist. So 40 of these is $6 on Amazon. And if you'll notice, it says 360 degrees. So they make these in 270 and 180. They do a really targeted spray, but in the aeroponics system, you want a full 360 degrees because the roots get wild and you want to make sure they're all being sprayed because dry roots are bad. Next, you're going to need a submersible water pump, and it has to be submersible because it's going to be in this water solution all the time. So if you get a dry pump, it's not going to work. This is something else you can find at your Lowe's or Home Depots. You typically find it in like the outdoor gardening. You'll see it in koi ponds or waterfall features. You can get this one on Amazon for $24, and it does 400 gallons per hour. You may not know how many gallons per hour you're going to need. It depends on how much piping and how far away your water tank is from the plants. But 400 worked for me, and it comes with all the features and the connections that you need. Next, you're going to need something to hold the plants. So you see here, this one is $18, and it'll work just fine. But I opted for this actual plant table for $100 from Botanicare. It's 3 feet by 3 feet. It's a lot sturdier than this flimsy black plastic, and it's got really good irrigation channels, as you can see here. Now, pro tip, again, I wouldn't use this had I done this again. My initial build was a flood and drain table. So the plants sit on the table and the water would flood it for 10 minutes every hour, and then it drains. Now, when I did this, I didn't realize how big of an impact the light hitting the plants and the medium holding the plants would be. And it turned into an algae nightmare to the point where I couldn't even clean it. I had to throw everything away. But I didn't want to buy anything else because I'm cheap, and I made it work. And the next slides will show how I made that work. But if you're going to build this, something like this would work, and you just cut holes in that and drop the plants in there. So the net pots. So, in your typical garden plant that you buy from the store, it has a little plastic container that the plant sits in, and it's got a couple holes in the bottom for drainage. In an aeroponics system, you want something that's like this with lots of slots and a bunch of holes. You can get 50 of these for $10 on Amazon. And why you want it like this is so the roots get exposed to the mist and they can just grow through it freely. Next, you're going to need a medium for the pots. So I chose clay pebbles, which are basically just little clay rocks. This 10-liter bag is $15, and 10 liters translates to like 40 pounds. So this is going to last me the rest of my life. If you go this route and use clay rocks, rinse them before you use them because they're really dusty and that's bad for the water. So just, get enough for the pots. As you can see here, they just sit in there. This is what the roots look like. I'll show you another picture of that in a moment. But rinse them off and then you're good to go with that. Next is something to hold the pots in place and to block light from, the water solution, everything like that. We're all familiar with cardboard. They make corrugated plastic, which is essentially the same thing. It's got the little ribs between. It's waterproof, it didn't grow mold, and it was easy to cut. And I also bought a little circle cutter from the same, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever. And it puts a little hole in the center with a razor blade. It spins around so I could cut the circle for the net pots. So this thing's less than 25 bucks for the cardboard or the corrugated plastic. And this is a big sheet. It's 4 feet by, I don't even know, 96 inches, 6 feet. And I cut it down to 3 by 3 and I had some left over for whatever else I needed it for. Next, you're going to need a container for your water solution. One of the things that appealed to me about hydroponics or aeroponics is that it's kind of low maintenance. And once you get this all set up, this thing will hold 20 gallons of water. So you don't really need to water it often. You just come down and check, make sure the water level is higher than the pump because you don't want it to burn out. And it's pretty much set it and forget it from there. And finally, you're going to need a light. So the pictures you saw earlier, I was using a high pressure sodium light. When I first got into this hobby, LED lights weren't a thing, but now that they are, this is absolutely the way to go. A 500 watt is $50, 1000 watts, $90. I think I paid like $400 for a high pressure sodium for a 400 watt, but it's a tank and it's lasted 20 years. So when it finally dies, I'll replace it with this, but this is absolutely the way to go now. Now let's put that all together. Remember the pre-made system for 940 bucks? Ridiculous. This entire homemade system with a light is $250 and you're done. Now, the only thing that doesn't factor in here is the time it takes to put it all together. And I apologize, I didn't realize I'd be doing a talk on this or I would have taken more pictures of the build process, but let's go through what we have here. So you take your container that's going to hold the plants that the sprayer will be in, you measure it, you get the PVC pipes and you cut them. And it's like playing leaky pipes on a Windows system back in the day. You put it together, doesn't look right, pull it apart, try it again. It's like, oh, this T goes here, this end cap goes here. You figure it out, boom, done. Next, you're gonna need the sprayer nozzles in. So you just get a little drill a hole, pop those in. Whoops. Where we are, there we are. And then if you could see around here, I use a pure silicone caulk and just to keep, seal the gaps. So I don't want any water leaking out of there. I want it all coming out of the nozzle. And then this is it all put together. So you see the corrugated plastic, the net cups, the rock or clay pebbles. And I put little PVC pipes in here to support it because they started to sag a bit. And now you're basically done. So sit back and watch your hard work come to life. So after a few days, you start to get some sprouts. You could start the seeds in, a wet paper towel or something like that if you want to just drop seedlings in. Or if you just want to put seeds into the net cups, that works too. So feed and pollinate. Those are key things to growing plants. So when you're doing this, you don't need plant food, but the difference between using plant food and not is night and day. Your plants will be humongous. The more fruit, bigger fruit if you use plant food. Now it's important to use a hydroponic based or a food made for hydroponics. You don't want to use something that's made for soil because it may not be as water soluble. It'll clog your sprayer and your pump, and that's just a nightmare you don't want to deal with. Now, the other thing with aeroponics and hydroponics is it's a soilless growing system. So there's nothing absorbing any of the nutrients. It's all going straight to the plants, and you'll see that here in a second. So this is, week 1, I think. I think this is week 2 or 3, and just see how big these things are getting. So if you see here, each one's next to each other, and I didn't plan for how big they were going to get. So in the next picture, I had to, weed out the ones that weren't doing too well. And when you're growing plants, you'll notice that some are doing better than others. You just get rid of the ones that aren't doing well to make space for your healthy ones. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever grown peppers before, but these things got massive in this aeroponics solution. So like a typical pepper leaf, when you're growing it outside, is like as big as your hand. These things were like 2 dinner plates. Like I was cutting them off and showing people because it was just so impressive. Now, when you're growing these, the canopy will get really dense and the leaves below will start to die off. It's important to cut back on those because you don't want the plant to focus any additional energy trying to keep those alive. You want it to spend its energy on growing the healthy leaves and foliage and putting all the energy into fruiting and the vegetables. And I'll show you a picture of that later too. So do you remember this picture? The tomato plants. They got 5-6 feet tall. I never saw a single tomato and I couldn't figure out why. I didn't realize how important bees were, and I didn't want to bring a bunch of bees into my house. So easy solution, $5 electric toothbrush. Once your plant starts to flower, this is a green pepper. It grows these little flowers with little pollen sacs. And in nature, bees, birds, all those creatures take that pollen and spread it around. In your house, you don't have that luxury. I didn't know that. And an easy solution was a $5 electric toothbrush. Once your plant starts to pollinate, you just take the electric toothbrush, turn it on, hold it next to the stem over here, shakes the pollen loose from these flowers, it pollinates the other ones, and now you have fruiting plants. This is what happy and healthy roots look like in an aeroponic solution. So this is the underside of the corrugated cardboard in the net pots. The roots just run wild underneath there. Like it looks like a tangled mess. It's insane. But these all hang and the solution just sprays constantly around there. There's nothing stopping, interfering with the absorption of the nutrients and everything. It's just straight roots and water nutrients. Now that you've fed, pollinated, all that, you start to get your fruit. So this, I don't remember exactly the timeline here. I should have chronicled it better. But I think the life cycle on the green peppers was 60 to 90 days to maturation. Another thing I didn't realize was green peppers, red peppers, and yellow peppers all come from the same pepper. So I was saving seeds from green peppers and red peppers that I was buying at the store and planting them, and they're all green. And I couldn't figure out why. Go figure. You just leave them on the plant longer and they mature and sweeten and they turn red and yellow. But you can see here, they're starting to grow and they're looking healthy. The plants will continue to flower all the time. So if you see here, like there's little trimmed roots, there are trimmed branches and stems. And like I mentioned, once the canopy gets really dense, the leaves start fighting for light and they'll start crowding each other out. Just want to trim those back so the plant is focusing on the healthy leaves and putting all its energy into growing the vegetables. Now, after they look ripe and you're happy with them, you can enjoy. So you just pull them off, add them to your food, and you're off to the races. So in summary, back to this picture of me in a hot dog costume in China, laying on top of the test vehicle in the automotive hacking village. Information security has taken me all over the world. I've been to China, England, Poland, Germany, everywhere in between, all because it's a highly in-demand field and your skills are appreciated. Get out of your own head if you don't think you're good enough. I still don't think I'm good enough, but that doesn't stop me from getting in there and trying. There's plenty of people that would love to help. It doesn't matter where you're starting from or what your background is. All you have to do is put in a little effort, a little dedication, and try. That's where we all start. You just start poking around and it'll take you places. Finally, some references, and I'll leave the slide up for a moment for anybody who wants to take a screen cap. But Car Hacking for Pories, Charlie Miller and Chris Valsic, they're great. They're the ones that did the G-Pack a few years ago. But Car Hacking for Pories teaches you how to buy an ECU for cheap, set it up on a 12-volt power supply on a workbench so you're not testing an actual car, and you can poke around. There's other resources out there that'll show you how to virtualize it so you're not messing with the actual car. You can virtualize infotainment units now. You can download, images for those things and play with them in a virtual box or something like that. The relay attacks on passive keyless entry and start systems. I think that's what gave us the blueprint for building our remote keyless entry system. Everything's out there already. And like with anything hardware based, it's kind of a test and discovery. Once the initial vulnerability or technique is found and put online, all the hard work's done. You just need to find it and put it together. You don't need to do all the research yourself. Somebody else has done it, and you just need to put it together. As for the crops, I didn't use any of these resources when I built mine. I'll admit I actually purchased one of those solutions in the past. It was a little 4x4 one, so I didn't spend a fortune, but it was still kind of expensive. And I realized how it worked, and then I put a bigger one together. But I did a little research on these before this talk just to make sure that these would be good to provide some guidance. And these all had really good, plans and explanations as to what you're doing and how to build it. Now, with that being said, any questions?
Awesome presentation, Griffin. There are a couple. So first one was, are bugs like fruit flies and gnats an issue with aeroponics?
No, they were. I did actually have some flies. There's some little fruit flies in the basement, but I wasn't sure if it was from the liquor collection down there or what. But it wasn't a big problem because they would just land on top of the plastic and drown. So it wasn't overwhelming. I didn't really have any issues ever with that though.
Okay, great. And do you have any best practices for trimming or pruning plants?
No, just get some spring-loaded clippers because the other ones are a little hard to deal with. But if the doesn't look healthy or if the leaf's starting to wilt or turn brown, you don't want the plant spending too much time on that. So just clip it off. And I feel bad doing it because I don't want to hurt the plants. I actually spend a lot of time with these things. Like I say, it's really low maintenance and you can set it and forget it. But I was down there all the time and I would just like sit because it's like fake sunlight. And you're talking to them and you can actually like see progress like every few hours. They're bigger and bigger, which is crazy to me. So yeah, you just care for them. You're doing the best for them. So you cut off the dead or dying leaves and branches and they get stronger.
Question about, let's see. Oh, well, someone commented and said you need more bees in your presentation. So next time, more bees.
Next time I'll do them in the house too. So I was like, what can I do with this? Like, can that be closet? That seems like a great idea.
And where do the extra screws come from?
I think they're just hidden in the chassis somewhere and they fall out once you take it apart. Just the manufacturer's just messing with you to encourage you not to play with their stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I had a question for you. And so for anyone, I guess, who might be, for the younger folk, how far back would you have to go to get a car that isn't susceptible to the hacking that you showed today?
I mean, I have a 2018 and most of that stuff still works. So not too far. And like I think I mentioned my wife's friend's car being stolen. Hers was like a 2020 and that relay technique still works. So, more of the higher end manufacturers started to put like the rolling crypto keys and things like that into it and like time-based responses. But some of the other ones just still don't care, or it's too expensive to go back and retrofit into all of these existing cars.
Do you have any recommendations for some PCAPs with CAN traffic for playing around?
I would talk to the auto hacking guys. They probably have better answers for that than me. Most of mine came from just trial and error. I would just connect to my car and start playing with things. Like I push the gas pedal down and like it would flood, CAN traffic when I did that with certain IDs. So I knew that had something to do with it. So I'd get those, trim out the ones that weren't related to that, replay them and see what it did. So it's kind of trial and error, you just play around, see what works and what doesn't, and make sure your vehicle's in park.
Right. Okay. And then have you made anything delicious out of your own plants?
I use peppers all the time. So nothing super delicious. It's just saves me a trip to the grocery store. And it's nice being able to enjoy the fruits of your labor, no pun intended.
Or vegetables, yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like the banana tree, I've been to 5 or 6 banana trees. I've never got them to the point where a banana will grow because it's like a 5 to 7 year process. But I'm really looking forward to that when it finally happens.
And you mentioned, I don't know if you started the aeroponic. Did you start the aeroponics in Cleveland or in Denver?
I did. So I just moved to Denver in November. I've been doing aeroponics for like 15 years now. So
my question is, does the air matter? So now I know you're 52, 80 feet above the ground. Does the air matter?
That's a good question. I have no idea.
Okay, let us know.
So the aero comes from the aerosol, I would assume, spraying of the mist, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Right? Does it matter at higher elevations?
I've never tried out here yet. Like we're still settling, so I haven't got the whole setup built
All
back.
right.
But soon, I'll let everybody
We'll
know
stay
next year.
tuned. All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Griffin. This was a
Thank you,
wonderful
everybody. And
presentation.
I'll be on Slack if you have any other questions, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks, everyone.